Here we go. All right. Well, that was just a weird little way to get started with you two telling me something wasn't right, and I needed to refresh, and then it said you're live. So welcome to the live show of The Business of Speaking. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and I have a very special guest today, Jay Baer. How you doing, Jay?
Tim, fantastic. Great to be with you.
Yes, you too. And for those of you maybe just watching for the first time, the whole concept of what I do here is I started having conversations with speakers as I was looking to elevate my speaking career. And there was just so many golden nuggets coming out of our conversations that I'm like, why am I not sharing this with the world? Because that's the type of person I am, is I love sharing and giving to people. So this is really for anybody that's interested, regardless of if you're thinking about getting involved in speaking, just getting started and wanting to elevate to the next level, or really anywhere along your path, because I'm a firm believer that we can all learn from each other. So with that, Jay, I would just love to start off our conversation. Just I've seen you speak on the stage, many times in small groups and in large, events. But tell me, because I've never actually asked you this or read about it, how did you actually get started speaking?
A little bit at a time, and then all at once. It was, I had given speeches for a long time. I have been in the digital marketing and customer experience industry as long as there really was an industry. I started in digital all the way back in 1993 when I was just a kid. And because that was, way before Google, way before anybody knew anything about the internet, just as, in my early 20s, I would be asked to come give a presentation to the local Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary Club or the whatever about, tell me about this internet thing, kid. What is that all about, right? Is that a thing we should pay attention to? So I gave that kind of a talk for no compensation, of course, a number of times when I was younger. But even before that, Tim, I guess I always was a speaker. I just didn't know it. Even when I was in high school, I would be even like a sophomore, so not a upperclassman at all. I was in student government, and they would say, all right, we need somebody to MC the talent show, or we need somebody to host the pep assembly. And they'd say, Jay will do it. He's not scared of the microphone. And so they always just kept giving me the microphone. And I never, ever, ever thought that speaking was a career or a business or even a job until much later. And I was working at an advertising agency in Phoenix. And one of our partner agencies was McDonald Marketing out of Dallas, Texas, founded by CSP Kelly McDonald. And I worked with her on a couple of projects, and I noticed that she was out giving a lot of speeches. So it was hard to get her on client meetings because she was always on the road giving speech. I'm like, well, what do you mean you're on the road giving speeches? And so I had a phone call with her about that. And I said, oh, there's actually a job here. And so there was, and she said, you should try it more. So I tried to actually do a little bit more speaking proactively, and I did. And then when I wrote my first book, I did a book tour with my co-author, Amber Naslin. We did like 20 cities and going to bookstores and doing a little summary of the book. And I really, really enjoyed that. And people said, oh, you're actually pretty good at that. And I said, oh, am I? Okay. And then I started to do more and more and more and more, and sort of fast forward 10 years, and here we are. I am a little different in this world, Tim, in that I never gave a paid presentation until I was 40 years old. My first paid gig, I was 40 years old. And I went from my first paid gig to being in what is colloquially known as the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame in 9 years, which is a pretty abrupt acceleration into the business. And I'm super thankful for all the support out there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I remember that you're bringing up some good memories for me when I lived in Chicago, because I know you weren't able to make it, but Amber represented and gave a talk on your first book at Social Media Club Chicago that I was part of the board of directors. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, that first time you got paid, was it, did you have a different feeling? Did it change how you thought about what you were going to be doing?
Of course. Absolutely. I mean, you I don't want to say take it more seriously because you're always trying to achieve whatever communication objectives you're sent to achieve. But there was a measure of pressure there that, wow, I better deliver because they're actually writing me a check. So yeah, it was different. Absolutely. But I've tried to inoculate against that in later years, because the way I work with my speaking agent, Michelle Joyce, is I don't know what I get paid. I really have no idea. So she knows what our sort of tolerances are in our business, and I don't even know what's happening until it shows up on my calendar, and then I go and deliver it, and some money shows up in my checking account, and our controller looks at it. So if some of you said, what did this client pay? No idea.
Really?
I don't
And
want to
how
know.
long? How long did it take you? I mean, did you start out with like, somebody doing that, or was it something
No,
that you
definitely
built
not. No, it
into?
took years. It gets to the point where I was spending so much time negotiating deals and doing paperwork and logistics and all of that around each presentation that it was making it harder and harder to develop the presentations. And also, Tim, I think it bears notice that yes, I do or did a lot of keynote speaking, certainly less than many of our contemporaries, but I typically in a pre-pandemic world would do 60 to 70 live events a year, which is a pretty good pace. But speaking is only about 25 to 30% of our overall company. So we have a very active consulting business, a media division as well. So I've got a lot of things that I need to execute on a regular basis beyond what happens on the stage. And until I brought Michelle onto the team, and she has an amazing roster of other speakers as well, it was getting to the point where the logistics of me booking my own gigs were starting to cause problems with my ability to oversee other parts of the business. And so it's been terrific because, number one, she has literally forgotten more about the speaking business than I will ever know. And I also feel like I never have to be the bad cop, right? Because I don't know. I have no idea what they're paying me. I don't know what the deal was. I'm just there to kill it on stage, and having somebody to handle all that and sort of be that cheerleader when necessary and the hammer when necessary is fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting, and I love the fact that you talk about that it's really a percentage of your overall business because you're involved in so many other things.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious because as I've looked, a lot of people seem to get started speaking much like you did in doing it for part of your job, right? And then and you're doing it a lot of times for free, but then it elevates to getting paid.
That's right.
And I'm just kind of wondering, how did you really view this, and what was your thought process between kind of making this a major part of your business revenue?
Yeah, and it really was it was not an accident. So after I did the book tour and I started to get a few very small gigs, I realized that I really enjoyed it, and I thought I was decent at it and could be better. But I realized that it was going to be challenging to really go after it on the speaking side if I was as involved in the rest of the company as I was at that time. So I sat down with our company and I said, look, I want to go from a consultant who does some speaking to a professional speaker who happens to own a consulting firm. And we put together a 5-year plan that essentially flipped the tables on that in terms of how I spend my time, what I focus on, and most importantly, Tim, on the consulting side, client expectations. Because the first thing we had to do, and it took a while, is to disavow clients of the notion that even though Jay owns the firm, Jay's not going to work on every single project and be in every single meeting or be on every single phone call. And so we had to sort of elevate the rest of the team, who are all geniuses in their own right. And one of the things we've done over the last few years to also sort of effectuate this plan is we have spent a lot of time, money, and effort on speaker training and personal brand development for the other strategists on our team. So Zanti Ho speaks a ton. Lauren Teague on our team speaks a ton. Jenny Magic speaks a ton. So several people on our consulting side also give a lot of presentations, which is a real win for us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're bringing up some memories of when I worked at HuffPost, and I'm sure most people have seen, like on the Today Show or Good Morning America or on your local news, they always have like these other, journalists or media people there. And we actually had our PR people actually train our editors and stuff if they were interested in getting on there, because it was good to generate more traffic, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's it's kind of fascinating to hear that something I learned in media you're picking up in the business world. So I think that's a great insight there as far as how you can generate more revenue.
I mean, what I told my team a few years ago was, look, the more famous you are, the less famous I have to be, and I'm okay with that, right? I don't. The one part of this business I don't like, maybe because I'm older or whatever, is the constant kind of fronting as a thought leader. Like, I love creating content and I love helping businesses and I love solving problems. But here's another Instagram photo of myself with an inspirational quote. Like, that whole personal branding industrial complex is just not what I prefer to do. It's just not my thing. And so the more we can spread that burden out across the company, the better off we'll be collectively.
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting point about how you get more opportunities and gigs, and so what outside of, I know you produce a lot of content, but what have you found works best for your business and getting more opportunities?
Well, the one thing that's inescapable is you have to over deliver on the platform, right? I mean, that has to be the core of any acquisition strategy in the speaking business. You have to not just deliver what the meeting planners and the audience expects, but you have to over deliver, because as Andrew Davis calls it, you have to have the referable speech, the speech that you finish and some percentage of the audience says, wow, I need this other group that I'm a part of to hear that same message. And they come up to you either immediately after or sometime after the presentation and say, hey, can you come give a presentation to us? And so, the old saying, Tim, the more you speak, the more you speak. And there's truth to that if you're exceeding expectations. And so that's really job one, is making sure that you're customizing your talk, you're delivering moments of surprise and delight on stage that people will remember. You just have to be better than they think you are. That's the first thing. Second thing is you've got to be massively easy to work with. And that's kind of what we pride ourselves on in my organization is that if we are not the easiest speaker to work with, sort of at my level, then we have failed colossally. So we have tried to rub off all the rough edges that sometimes occur in the process of hiring and retaining and bringing in a speaker. We don't hit it out of the park every single time for a lot of reasons, but that's certainly something that we try to do. And then it certainly helps that we have this company that produces. I mean, our blog has more than 3,000 articles on it, right? We've now produced a dozen different podcasts, right? So we are constantly, both myself and my colleagues, creating content in multiple formats that get people to understand the way we see the world of business, and if nothing else, puts my name and our name collectively, Convince to Convert, somewhere in the mind of the meeting planner and the audience, and eventually that will yield some gigs. The key is it takes a long time, right? It happens frequently that someone calls me and says, I saw you speak 7 years ago, or Social Media Chicago, right? That was 10 years ago, or pretty close to 10 years ago, but 8 years ago, I guess it would be. And I really like that. And now I've been promoted twice, and now I'm responsible for picking the speaker, and I would love for you to come back. And that's an 8-year sales cycle. And the reason that most people get frustrated with speaking when they first start is that they don't have the patience. Like, you know what? I've been working on this for 6 months, and I've been writing blog posts for 6 months, and I've been doing a podcast for 6 months, and I've been creating a YouTube for 6 months, and nobody's hiring me. It's like 6 months. That's nothing, especially when people have an annual meeting cycle in many cases. Like, you've got to play this game for years before you can really start to reap the benefits of what you've sown in the past, unless you are real world famous, right? Unless something happens, you land a plane in the Hudson or whatever, different story. But most of us don't have that scenario.
Well, it's interesting, because I'm a firm believer that it does take a lot of time, and most people are looking for the quick fix. So I'm glad you shed some light on that. When you were first starting, with the speaking side of the business, how did you kind of stick with it and make it through those times where you weren't just having a ton of people come to you and ask you to speak?
And the good news is I didn't care. because we were so busy on the consulting side. Every opportunity was a gift, and frankly, I feel like that's how a lot of newer speakers should think about it, right? If you're going into the speaking business, cold or early, and you think this is going to be cake for my life and my family, you might be disappointed. I think you're better off having a thing that you do and treating speaking as frosting. And then eventually, if it becomes cake, that's great. But I think to just show up and say, from now on, I'm going to be a professional speaker, that's a tough row to hoe. And not that it can't be done. It obviously can be done. It's done every day. But I think it's a difficult proposition, mostly because people don't have a differentiated message. Right? They're saying something on stage that other people have said over and over and over, and that makes it really difficult for them to stand out in the minds of a meeting planner unless they have some kind of on stage hook that matters. It's one of the reasons why in almost all the work that I do on stage, we do a lot of custom research. Right? I've invested tens, maybe $100,000 in custom research. Every presentation that I write, sort of a new keynote for a year or two, there's custom research, which then becomes a book, which then becomes a podcast, which then becomes all these other information assets. That's kind of my angle on it. I'm not the best speaker. I'm not the funniest speaker. I'm not the most polished speaker. But I can guarantee you that what I tell you is true because I've done the research myself and paid to have it done.
So you bring up a couple interesting points. I know you mentioned your blog, and then you just mentioned, the books and podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you look at how all these things kind of interconnect with each other?
It's still a work in progress. I still don't think I'm as good at it as I could be. But I actually go at it a lot differently than most people, I think, Tim. So for me, I write a keynote. Well, let me back up a step. So it's great to have a consulting firm because I'm talking to clients all the time and my colleagues, and I'm listening to the questions that are asking. In fact, we have each of our strategists fill out a survey every 2 weeks. It's sort of an automated push. It says, hey, what's going on in your world? How are your clients doing? How are these projects progressing? Just sort of a take the temperature of the team. And one of the questions that we ask each of our strategists every 2 weeks is, what questions have you heard from our clients that you think we might be able to answer? So I take those plus what I hear anecdotally, and I sort of put those into a bouillabaisse, if you will, and I sort of mull and ponder. And when I start to see a pattern of inquiry that I think will persist, that there isn't an obvious answer, it's not something that everybody knows, then I think, maybe that should be a keynote. And if I like the topic and I can see myself delivering advice on that topic for some amount of time, I'll actually sit down and write a new keynote, and then I'll take it on the road. We used to take it on the road. Now I'll take it on the Zoom, and I will deliver that presentation usually 20 to 30 times. And if it's going well and the audience likes it and I continue to refine it, then I'll turn it into a book. So for me, it's always questions I pull out of the air and see a pattern, then a keynote, then a book, then everything else, right? So blog posts, accompanying podcasts, video series, etc. But it always starts with questions that I pick up on that people are like, how do you do this? And how do you not know the answer to that? And then I try to provide the answer.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, because you're the first one that I think has actually explained the process that way to me. So that's pretty.
Well, most people do it the other way, right? So they write a
Right.
book and then they write a speech based on the book. And I think you write better books when you've done the speech a million times because you have a narrative flow and you've already polished the stories. You already know which stories work on stage, they're going to work on page. And so I just feel like it's a better way to produce a book, but that's just my take.
Yeah, no, great. Well, I know we're getting close to our time being up, but one question I would ask is, knowing what you know now, if you were to go back to yourself when you first started doing this, is there any advice you would give yourself?
Well, I would have started earlier for sure. I wouldn't have waited till I was 40 to do this. I would have started earlier. I would have taken video more seriously earlier, not just video of myself in terms of a trailer, but video content. I'm still not as good in video as I am in other formats. It's still a problem for me. And I think I would have told myself to be more comfortable with how I go about this business, right? The hardest thing in the speaking world is that no matter what you do or where you are, somebody's doing it better or more successfully. And that can be corrosive, I think, to all of us. And I find myself falling into that trap from time to time as well, especially because I go at it a little differently. One of the things I talked to about my good friend Shep Hyken once, he said, Jay, it's amazing because every time you write a speech or a book, it's about a different topic, right? One time you'll write about social media, and then one time I write about content marketing, and then one time about customer service, and now about customer experience and word of mouth. And those are all, somewhat loosely aligned. It's not like I'm writing one book about, oil rigging and one book about, dentistry, but, in the pantheon of speakers, I do tend to cover a much broader set of topics than others. And that can sometimes be a challenge to how to position me for meeting planners. Because I'm not just a social media speaker or whatever the circumstances are, and they want to categorize you. But to me, I've always said, look, I just want to talk about the things that I think are important right now, and whatever that is going to change. And that's a lot different than how most people go about this business. Like, I am a sales speaker. I speak about sales, and I don't do that, and I never have. And that really took me a long time to get okay with that. I always felt like I was doing it wrong because I couldn't stick to my knitting. And now I realize it's just how I go about it. But I'll tell you, Tim, my real answer is this. I would have tried to convince myself earlier on in my career that it was okay to be gone as much as I was. I mean, it took me 5 or 6 years to not feel guilty every time I boarded a plane. And now that I'm finally over that, there's no planes left to board.
Oh, and I'm sure, I don't want to assume, but I'm sure you mean getting away from the business, not your family, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why it broke me up all the time. When I started doing this, my kids were 9 and 6 ish, something like that, 10 and 7, which is older than a lot of people's kids are when they start. And they were old enough to know that I was making a choice to leave. It's not them versus the plane, obviously, but at that age, for me to just be gone because that's the career that I chose is different than when your kids are 3 and 1 or whatever, when you started speaking. And so I carried a lot of guilt around for a long time about being a speaker, especially because I chose it, right? I had a very successful career as a consultant, and I chose to do more speaking. So subsequently, I chose to not spend time with my family in that way. And it was really, really hard for me for a long time. And I finally gave myself permission to do it. And that lifted a lot of weight off of me. And I wish I would have given myself that permission earlier.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for sharing that and being with me today. How can people find you, get in touch with you?
The best place for me is jaybaer.com, JAYBAER.com. Also, my podcast, all about speaking and the magic of storytelling on stage, is called Standing Ovation. Just look for Standing Ovation wherever you listen to podcasts.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you for listening. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to sign off of our live stream on YouTube, but Jay agreed to stick around with me for just one more question. And if you head over to speaking.business and sign up for our email list, that will be the place you will receive this exclusive content that Jay's going to share with us just in a minute. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you soon.